Hey guys, welcome back. This is PureLunacy. Thank you for joining me. And today I have a special guest, one of my good friends that I have known for a very long time. I think it's been over a decade now, Colby Smith. Colby is an amazing mind, another one of those amazing minds that I get to have the privilege of knowing. He's a political consultant, works in Texas politics, national politics, local politics, has a bachelor's in political science from UTA, and he's also a veteran. Had a tour in Iraq back in 2005. So everybody give a round of applause for Colby. Colby, say hello
Hello,
to
everybody.
the
Hello, the pure crowd.
Pure crowd. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. I've been working from home. Got cabin fever. I'm ready to get out, but I'm good.
It's been wild. It's been a wild ride.
It has.
I know as a political consultant, we actually discussed on this right before we got started. Human contact is such a big deal of politics, or such a big part, a foundation of politics. And I just, mentioned that it's going to be a generational divide. The younger crowd, us younger folks, we're used to, connecting digitally, and the older generations don't necessarily have that pliability. How do you view all of this going on?
Well, it's been a quick switch, party-wide, as the Republican Party has switched, and it's been somewhat seamless.
Mm-hmm.
And the switch to digital, but the hard part is growing the party, I think,
Yeah.
is really where it's at, because that first trust, that first I'll listen to you, really comes from having a face-to-face conversation, figuring out that I, for example, am not insane,
Yeah.
and that you can trust that person. And that's still humans, they desire social contact, and we need that social atmosphere. And I see your face and I know we're talking, but
Yeah.
still you're on my screen, right? And so and it's we saw each other right before the quarantine started, and obviously these two interactions are just polarizingly different.
Yeah.
And I think that politics is really a personification of social structure and the ability to humans to interact. And I've kind of always laughed when sociologists will like go just study people. I'm like, just go study people in politics. That's that's the
Yeah.
heightened place, because it's you have to interact and talk about things that are very meta or very philosophical, and then you have to bring it down into a very concrete thing. And all of that is something that's done in person, so you can watch facial expressions, and if someone leans back or if they lean forward, and you can kind of feel out marketing, and am I getting my point across? And that can't really happen over even a Zoom meeting or a phone. And so people who are just getting into politics, I feel very sorry for our college graduates right now. I feel very sorry for
It's a different
people.
world.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out who they can trust and who they can get involved with, and all of us are sitting in our living rooms. And so it's very hard to get that started. And so yeah, I've gotten some people volunteering and helping, but growing that base is where the big conundrum is.
And one of the things that I'm starting to see also with, staying at home and how politics is shifting, the ideologies are shifting in terms of what takes precedence with being considered liberal or being considered conservative, and our rhetoric in the two different realms of liberal and conservative, it's completely changing. It's
Yeah.
shifting. And I would I would beg to say that we're starting to see almost I would say that we're almost seeing a challenge between capitalism and socialism in
Yeah.
terms of how to combat coronavirus and how it's affecting our society. What's your take on all of this?
Yeah, if you go before coronavirus, we'll
Yeah.
we'll call it BC. If you go to BC, There was some arguments economically about the future,
Yeah.
but most of it actually still mostly delved around capitalism. I
Yeah.
remember when Trump put the tariffs, that there was a lot of fighting over whether those tariffs were good for a capitalistic approach and who was being taxed based on the tariffs. But the arguments were under the umbrella of capitalism.
Yeah.
I do think that, but that argument was a smaller segment of the political debate. The main debates were over foreign policy and how we should deal with ISIS or how we should deal with foreign leaders in our discussions with them. Oh, a million different things, healthcare. All of that has been strewn aside, oddly, healthcare included, has been strewn aside for this political, economic debate of should the government pay for everything
Yeah.
or should we go back to work? And the issue in lies is much deeper than just economics. It's not just capitalism versus socialism. It's
Exactly.
truly freedom versus not being free. And I've always kind of had to debate people on this premise that in a free society there's risk, period. And in human interaction there's risk in life. And
Right.
sometimes economically we're talking about dollars, but in a million ways there's risk.
Mhm.
And so we as a people have to somewhat trust each other in a free society. There has to be a level of trust. But more than that, we have to be able to take those risks based on how we feel. It's a personal decision.
Right.
But every time you get behind the wheel in a car on a highway, you're taking a risk, and you do that to make more money for your family or to whatever reason. That's the whole beauty of being in a free society is you choose why you're taking that risk. What's been fascinating to see on the governor level, it's been state level
Yeah.
or lower, that the government has suddenly said you don't get to choose how much risk you take. And that's a fascinating new political theory. And it's strewn across the Constitution like insanely. Like y'all can't, you don't have a freedom to assemble. You don't have a freedom to go to church. And because there's too much risk. And so therefore the government says that kind of risk we're not willing for you to take. So
And I think
that
that's crucial that you say that because
philosophy is fascinating.
exactly. I think we're seeing a paradigm shift of what truly is considered freedom and what is considered a right or a privilege.
Right.
And I think that when people hear these things on either side, one side will say, you know what, this is about our health and our lives, shut it all down.
Mm-hmm.
Not, this isn't taking away your freedom, this is, protecting your life. But on
Mm-hmm.
another side, there is the concept that, you have these rights and they're inalienable rights. And
Mm-hmm.
whether your health is involved or not, you're infringing on it. How
Right.
dare you?
Right.
And the question is, where do you draw the line, and where is it measured to where, yes, we do ensure health and safety, but we also ensure freedom and rights are protected.
And that's what's made socialism versus capitalism kind of take the forefront of that, because I think a true constitutionalist and federalist, someone who believed in the Federalist Papers, would state that the government doesn't have the power, nor do you have the right to live healthily. That's not a right of yours. And the reason we can say that is the average life expectancy when the Constitution was written was like 39. So, like, no, it's not the government's job to keep you healthy. Now, they do have to provide security, and I think that's where some people have differentiated between what that is. And I would say that that's obviously a strong national defense and an ability for you to live safely without direct harm. But as to a virus or to elective surgeries, I don't know that falls under security. And so
Right.
it's a hard line to draw. But I will state that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, even more so, but life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I believe, are such direct rights that we've said they're given to us by God. And so therefore there's no other reason to take those out, whether it's security or not. We do believe that the government has the obligation to keep us secure, but more than that, that it can't override those rights because that does not come from the government. So, that's the debate.
And as a Christian, I am a Christian. I do agree that these are inalienable rights.
And God can be your creator.
Given to us by God. But what do we do? What do you do when? And this is just me being a theorist now. This is just me thinking out loud. But what do you do when you have a society that shifts, that no longer has? Sorry about that. Give me 1 second. What do you do when you have a society that no longer has that faith in God, no longer has that foundation in what we considered to be the framework that developed our Constitution? And how does that paradigm shift affect the foundation and the validity of what was once considered to be of veracity and the leading factor? How do we placate all the sides, and how do we move forward? How this is a new America, clearly,
right?
And how do we prevent another civil war
with the downfall of the foundation? Well, you're right. So any law, whether it's constitutional or statutory or whatever it is, any law is only as enforceable as it is followed. So, if we all decided right now that we're all going to go outside and light a joint and sit on our porch, pot is now legal. It's legal because if everyone does it, there's no way to enforce it. So no law is as powerful as it is enforceable. So the Constitution, taking God or any philosophy out of it, is a piece of paper. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it has no actual power. But the idea that that humans have rights, we will say from God, but it's actually from your creator. Even in saying there is no God, we still have a creator, and whether it's evolution, physics, whatever you want to say, there is something that made us be here. And there's no way you can say that's not true unless you believe in like the Matrix theory that we're all in a simulation.
The Matrix has a creator too. It's just a robot.
Yeah. So if we're all in a grand simulation, then maybe not. But if we can all agree that we're in a reality, then something put us here. And so I still think that argument still bears fruit, whether it's a Christian God or even an atheist. By chance, we're here.
Evolutionary.
As humans, as highly functioning sentient beings, we have those rights, and that's what you want to state. And so, and I think that argument, that counter argument to that is it will fall on its face every time. I do think a lot of those philosophies are based on God, and I agree. But that doesn't dissuade the fact that they were millennia of philosophy and political history that went into, say, John Locke or Calvin Hobbes or Machiavelli and all of those different philosophers who George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and Alexander Hamilton all sat down and really worked through. I always tell people why I love George Washington is he was fascinated with Cincinnati, the Roman general who became dictator. He was a farmer. He became dictator. He won the war, and then he went right back to farming. And the fact that George Washington even knew who Cincinnati was just shows how well read and how well studied these men were. Like Cincinnati now. People who are watching will probably Google him on Wikipedia, but George Washington didn't have that ability. So, this man went, he went and sought out a leather-bound book and read it. And so that's my point is this Constitution and the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers are brilliant writings of great philosophy and great study. Exactly. And, we become dismissive of that as we watch.
That's the key. I think you hit the nail on the head. we've forgotten where we've come from. We've forgotten the framework and the foundation of what made our country what it is. And that's why it's so easy to just move on to the next fad and just say, yeah, socialism, sure.
Yeah.
We've forgotten why America is the power that it is. And it's not because of these new ideas that aren't really new. They've been tried in other countries and they failed.
Right. All of it had been tried. And by the way, Marx wasn't the first socialist. He was the first to really, and a Marxist theory put it out. But there had been different monarchies who had practiced communal living. There had been different societies. The Jewish culture was very communal. There had been a lot of things that had been tried. None of this is new. Democracy is not new. Republicanism is not new. What makes us exceptional, when people say the exceptional American experiment, is not that our form of government, having two houses, or all of that's been done. It's really the idea that we bring a ton of different cultures and a ton of different religions and a ton of different things, and we state that we have one central premise of American exceptionalism, and that we don't need a king and we don't need some brilliant person running this. Instead, we're going to rely on documents alone. And that's never succeeded. It's succeeded for short stints, but never truly. And we have to thank British law and British history for that. I mean, you had the Barons' War, the Magna Carta. That's right. The Barons' War, which led to the Magna Carta, which led to all of this. And so we believe in the supremacy of law. But still, a lot of the British offshoots still don't go as far as we do with the supremacy of law. And the idea, we just had an impeachment a few months ago, just the idea that everyone is held accountable. And so that's a beautiful,
you stand. Even if you're the leader,
beautiful thing.
Most powerful country in the world, they will take you to task.
Right, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's we have a peaceful revolution every 4 years, and it's awesome. It's awesome. We overthrow our government every 2 years, really, and I think that's pretty awesome. But all of that being said, the reason we can overthrow our government is what's important, not the fact that the government is there. I mean, the thing you got to remember is the evolution of government. It can only evolve if it's changing, and the only way it changes is if we can overthrow it, and we can do it peacefully. Okay, and that's the part. That's right. And so, go vote. And so that's the thing. When you realize how important it is that you can peacefully overthrow your government, that's what matters. And so that's why I lean libertarian. That's why I'm scared of government and giving government that kind of power, because I can peacefully kick them out right now. And things like socialism and things where they can back up, things where, there's two women in Laredo who were cutting hair, and they both went to jail because they were cutting hair in Laredo, Texas. We had the salon owner.
Let's be honest, the media kind of ignored them until our Dallas salon owner decided to rip up hers, and people started calling them out on social media, saying, "Why are you giving her credit when we've had two women in Laredo who were sitting in jail this whole time?"
Yeah, for weeks, and it's absurd. It's absurd. The government can take away your freedom, your life. Those, and that's why I'm anti-death penalty. The government can take away your life.
I'm not anti-death penalty. I know.
That. I go toe to toe with a lot of my conservative friends on this. But I just don't believe the state that, especially if we're going to give them socialism, if we're going to do that too, you really got to think about the other powers you've already given them, and how much you want to rely on that.
And I will always concede, if we lived in a utopia where things were perfect and human beings were perfect, socialism would be great. It'd be awesome if everybody had everything and everything was shared equally, and we all took care of each other. It'd be called a utopia.
Yeah, but you wouldn't need a government. You wouldn't need a government if that were the case. That's
It'd be a perfect world. It's called what is it? The Garden of Eden before Adam and Eve. They
Yeah,
ruined it
and
for
I mean we
everybody.
tried it, and it's worked a little bit, but I always, I always in this debate of Sweden, or they'll bring up Denmark, their liberty scale on their economy is much higher than the United States. They're more
But
deregulated. They're
they're
more
also a
capitalist
very
than we are.
homogeneous
Yes,
population.
small
It's not a
population.
it's a small population. They don't have a lot of variety.
Right.
Everybody's basically the same. They've all lived there. They've been there forever. That's it. And I will say this. We're starting to see a challenge to those concepts in Denmark and Sweden
Hmm.
because of the refugees who have come from Syria, from the Middle East, from war-torn countries, and they're
Hmm.
starting to see a challenge to the way of
Yeah.
life because you
Different
have these
culture.
new immigrants, these new cultures, and it's
Right.
like, oh crap, maybe our perfect utopia isn't perfect after all
Right.
when you start including all these factors. And that's the big thing that makes America so amazing, is that
Right.
we're a melting pot. We're a melting
Right.
pot where people can come in, who you are, however you are, just everybody live in peace. Don't kill me, I won't kill you, and we'll live in peace.
Right.
Even though there are people still killing each other, they should stop doing that,
They
especially if
should
it's
stop.
young.
We should all agree to stop doing that. I agree with
Please.
that. But no, yeah, when you look up the Economic Freedom Index, it's breathtaking how Sweden has less regulation than the United States. Denmark has less regulation than the United States. And so when you sit here and say that these guys are just these huge communist manifestos or socialist manifestos, and
Apples to oranges.
yeah, these
It's
guys
not
aren't
comparable.
socialists. They're not socialists. And if you go sit down with the prime minister or president of Denmark and say, "Hey, how do y'all like being socialists?" They're going to laugh you out of the room. They're not socialists. And Bernie Sanders is lying. He's lying when he says that we're going to
You're
be
going to
like.
get Bernie Sanders people angry now.
I'm sorry, but he's lying. That's not what we're looking to do, and that's not what he's claiming he wants. And so you just have to be honest about what socialism is, what its outcomes are, and what we're looking for. And so
Its
when
outcomes are failure.
yes, and
It
because
happens.
pure socialism is Venezuela, pure
Yes.
socialism is Cuba. We have those examples right now,
And they
and
failed. And they
yes,
failed in the New
and they
World,
always have.
in the
They always
West.
have. Yes, they'll fail everywhere. But and then you say, well, it's democratic socialism,
There's
which
no
to me
such
is
thing. That
yeah,
doesn't.
which is this well, it's this newfound socialist light thing, and it's the idea that we'll be more like Denmark, but it doesn't work. It
No.
doesn't work, not with our population, and you can see that in the fact that Greece would be a prime example. Portugal, Italy. You can study these economies with big welfare
And they
states,
fail.
and they collapsed because they had too large a population. So if you're going to sit there and say things like that, you need to study the truth behind it. And I know it sounds easy, but
Nothing is easy. I
it's not.
mean, it's fairly easy trying to figure out what you're going to eat for lunch, and you want to
No.
solve the problems of the world.
Yeah, this socialist experiment, which the coronavirus lockdown is the closest we've come to it. Our unemployment
Yes.
rate is above 14%. We have the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression. Suicides, domestic violence, child abuse, everything is skyrocketed through the roof. This country is in a lot of pain from this lockdown, and the truth is that there's a lot of metrics we're not looking at. We're looking at who's getting sick, who's dying, but there's a lot of side effects of this collapsed economy that we are not talking about, we are not looking at, and they are despicable, they are disturbing, and they're things we need to talk about that humans need, especially Americans in our culture. We need to be productive. We need to be working. We need to
And I
be
think
doing something.
and I've said this before, it's because our framework, our foundation is not based on socialist measures. They are based on capitalist measures. And in order for our society and our economy and our government to function successfully, that foundation of capitalism and interaction must function. And the
Yes.
second it doesn't, we collapse.
Yeah.
And I've heard, people like, who is it, Bill Gates, or, celebrities, people, who
Yeah.
are living a good life,
Yeah.
say, oh, well, just shut it down for a month or
Yeah.
2 months. Just shut
It's fine.
everything down.
It's fine.
And my first thought is, how?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah. And the ramifications of it. The food banks are full of people looking for food. People are starving. There is real things going on here. And, we'll sit around and say, well, my iPhone's fine. I'm fine. And I am fine. But you know what? I can work from home. I've been blessed with
What about the
that.
people who can't?
There's a lot, 14% of the country can't. And when you're sitting here talking about 14 to 20% of the country, you're talking about a lot of people, millions and millions of people who are going hungry.
I will admit, I do believe that it was necessary to flatten at least the curve.
Yes,
and have
absolutely.
measures to stay at home. So this is no way to negate the importance of social distancing, the importance of staying at home.
You should.
But I do believe that there is a necessity to slowly phase in the folks in the population who can interact, who can partake in our framework of capitalism, that we don't collapse as a country.
Exactly.
Because let's be honest and let's be clear. China and Russia are watching, and they're very happy with the results of our collapsing economy. They're fine. They're happy.
There's always foreign policy. No matter what's happening, there's foreign policy. But yeah, you're right. So we have our medical resources, and if you didn't do the lockdown, we would have surpassed it, and it would have been like Italy, right, where they had 2 people sharing a ventilator. It would have been terrible.
Yes.
But we flattened that curve, and now it's starting to decline. So now we're going to let people out, and the cases are going to go up. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. That's not the goal. The goal is not to defeat the virus without a vaccine and without herd immunity. That's literally impossible. And so the fact is that we have to get the disease. It's a sad truth. We have to, unless a vaccine comes out, which I'm telling you, there's not a 100% chance that we're going to create one that works. The flu vaccine barely works.
It'll take at least a year to 2 years before the flu vaccine can come out.
And even if we did, let's say the success rate of it was 80%, like the flu. I mean, these vaccines are not 100%. None of them are. Yeah. So you're not going to know whether you're truly vaccinated or not. So in the end, those who have very low death rates, like those below 60, those who are healthy, who are not have any immunodeficiencies, things like that, get them back out there, get them working, let them earn a living for their families and for their homes, and
take the steps necessary
to stay 6 feet apart, wear a mask,
don't crowd people up into like they're cattle, and take the precautions, but there is a need for some kind of phasing into the communities, some kind of phasing, and the people who are most affected in our communities are always the bottom tier. They're always bottom tier. So I really
on their last leg already. Yeah.
So
and then you can't get out of under. But that's another thing that we were kind of saying before. When you live in a free society, you have to trust your fellow man. And by us saying you have to stay in your home is us saying I don't trust you to stay 6 feet away from me. What kind of society is that? Where you can't say that. Now, are there going to be a few turds? Yes, there's always a few turds. All right, if you get on the road, there's some guy who drank and got behind the wheel. There's some guy who did things that were stupid, and that's true. But America is known as the land of the free because we trust each other. If we needed the government to enforce everything, then it's not a free country. And so you're really, like I said, when you're debating this thing in your head, this capitalism, socialism, this should we leave, should we not, you're truly debating huge philosophical things that have been debated before. The Spanish flu, smallpox, this country has dealt with these things before. Yeah. and which agreed. I mean, British government truly influenced us. So even, the plague. And so let's not act like this is new. Let's not. Now, is it new in our lifetime that we have a disease that we know nothing about? Absolutely true. A disease like this that spreads like it does, this is a new phenomena, and we know nothing about it. We're learning. It has a ridiculous incubation period. There's a lot of things we're trying to figure out.
Asymptomatic and infect everybody like your typhoid Mary.
Exactly. It's crazy. Yeah, exactly. But just to throw out government philosophy and the belief in a free society is an insane reaction. And like I said, it's such an overstated quote. I believe it's Benjamin Franklin, but he who will give up an ounce of freedom for security will gain neither and deserves none. And it's overused by very stupid people, but now I'm seeing a reason it should be used. We believe that we need to always be safe, and we're willing to give up our own freedoms for that. Like, no, I'm a veteran. I've obviously proven I will absolutely put my life on the line in order to be free. And the idea of the American people should be the same. Of you're not going to threaten me, you're not going to hold me back, and don't do it needlessly. Like, let's not all go jump off a cliff because we're free. But also don't let yourself be buried in your house. And so I'm glad a lot of these governors are lifting the restrictions, and I think
in phases.
Yes,
I think it's
smartly, intelligently,
not
yeah.
just everybody go out.
Yeah, we don't want to be stupid, and I think there's a medium ground here. We don't have to let everyone out like crazy, and we also don't have to lock everyone up forever. There's an intelligent middle ground where we can start to phase things in, and we can watch the healthcare system handle it. Because again, it's that curve that all we're worried about. Keep them below the resources. Let us get out there. There's going to be a spike in cases. There's going to be more hospitalizations. There's going to be more deaths. It's just going to happen. But
one thing that I do think is important as we, address this, as we talk about, our health system, as we talk about how we move forward. One of the things that is being brought to light that we as a society, in a free society, do need to address is the harsh reality of our health industry and our poverty in our country and the inequities within our different communities. And it's not just a solution of, well, just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. There are people who don't even have boots to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. So I think that as we move forward, as we do slowly phase in, I think that we're going to have to come to terms that there is a lot that isn't perfect in our American society.
True.
And how do we move forward in addressing that poverty inequity? How do we move forward in addressing that health inequity? Because clearly, if we start looking at the numbers, the percentage of folks who are at the bottom tier of our economic society are going to be the most heavily impacted, while the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts and the upper echelon are, chilling on their cruises and their yachts.
Well, you're talking about two different things. So I'll agree. I agree. There's poverty. No one can deny that, and no one can deny that they are the hardest hit. I don't know that I would compare them to like the three richest men in the world. I don't think that's a fair comparison. But that being said, since Trump became president, 6 million people 6 million people were lifted out of poverty.
Yes.
And so the real question is there poverty or is there not poverty? Which sometimes I've seen that debated. The real question is how do you fix poverty? Exactly. And I think that's the issue that, especially when dealing with Republicans, we will be accused of pretending there's not poverty. And I don't believe that anyone dealing with policy believes that, nope, they're just poor, but they don't exist. That's not the stance. Instead, you want to see what works. In a growing, thriving economy, like I said, 6 million people were lifted out of poverty. African American poverty was at the lowest in history. The unemployment rate among minorities, lowest in history. But by the way, there's two stats there. It wasn't just the unemployment rate. The employment rate, the percentage of them who were working, was at the highest in history. And so when you kind of look at that and you see this movement of, food stamps dropping off and the welfare state not having to hold up people, and that's a good thing. You can kind of see a system that was working in the right direction. Now, coronavirus shut that down. Yeah. So, but when you say conservative ideals, capitalism works, that's what we're talking about. Those numbers are real. All right. We had the lowest food stamp usage. We had the lowest unemployment among minorities. And the reason I keep saying among minorities is minorities were the largest portion of the welfare state users. And so we were not only just getting them employment, but we were lifting them out of poverty, and they were doing it themselves. It wasn't anyone else but them. But they were able to work. They were able to gainfully employ themselves, and their culture was shifting because of it as well. And so it's the long-term fix is a functioning society with a lower middle, upper class, a larger middle class than anywhere else in the world. And that's what America is. We still are, by the way. We love to concentrate on the Jeff Bezos of the world, and we love to concentrate on the poorest among us. Yeah. But we forget that we still have the largest middle class, and that there are people who are living very nicely.
Squeezed slowly.
Yeah, it is. Well, it was. I mean, those numbers are shifting before coronavirus. There's been a big economic problem over the last few months, and so it's very hard. We still don't know what the impact is of coronavirus. It's been atrocious across the world.
It's going to be an impact for the next decade at minimum. If we're going to be sincere and honest, economic.
It's across the world. Yeah, I mean, China is collapsing. There's an economic impact across the globe. It's not just America that's dealing this, but the middle class was growing. Everything was doing well. Now the upper class was growing too. Jeff Bezos was getting richer. But you got to remember that when you discuss capitalism, we're talking about wealth creation. Right. There's not this closed off piece of the pie, and if Jeff Bezos gets a piece, none of us get any. That's not what's happening here. This is we're creating wealth, and so when
my big thing is this: we want to create wealth. And we want to have the opportunity, the equitable, not the equal, the equitable opportunity for everyone to have an opportunity.
Exactly. You got to stop that monopoly if it's happening. I agree with you.
Unfortunately, Jeff Bezos is encouraging the monopoly.
That's true. Now, I'm not
if we're gonna be honest, we need a little bit of trust busting.
Yes.
Roosevelt style.
Yes, and I am not a huge protector of the big business. I'm not. I believe they should have to compete on an equal field. And that's not happening, and that's both parties have caused that. So I'm not going to sit there and say that this is a partisan ideal. This is this is a capitalist idea. When you don't have to pay taxes,
there needs to be some regulations. Yes. There's some limitations where, buddy, you can't buy everything up.
No, not even just that, but if you don't have to pay taxes, if you're getting subsidized, that's not capitalism. That's not capitalism. That's not equal competition. So GE has paid zero taxes for something like 7 years. I'm sorry, but the upcoming
how many loans and forgivenesses
have we given them? Right. But it's not capitalism, because if I want to open my factory and I want to compete with him, I have to pay taxes, and the government has set up an uneven competing field. Capitalism is even competition, and there's some antitrust laws, there's some anti-monopoly laws. I think
but we need to start enforcing.
We have to,
trust. Totally. We need to start holding these businesses and these corporations accountable, because in the past, 10, 20 years, the amount of monopoly behavior that we've allowed in America, I believe, contributes to the inequities that we see socially. And the reason, I think one of the biggest reasons why we saw a lot of the communities that you did mention, especially the minority communities, were able to lift themselves up, was not a dependence on these big businesses or big corporations. It was because they were small businesses, they were entrepreneurs, and they were intellects who were going out there creating their own, financing, which is so frustrating. That's why I find it so frustrating when I find out these multi-million-dollar corporations were able to get all the funds from the CARES Act, and these small businesses who are truly the reason why our economy was functioning. The reason why our economy was doing well was because of the individuals who are contributing to our society by being entrepreneurs and business owners. They didn't get a chance to get help. Right. And I'm like you, I'm an equal opportunity offender. I blame both sides on this one.
Yeah. No, the CARES Act, I will say, and the president said it in a press conference, the big businesses getting it, that was not the intent. Mm-hmm. And I know there's going to be some follow-up by the Department of Treasury. They've already said so. Good. But the bigger issue in lies is whether medium companies should get them, and what the goal to the CARES Act was. Was it to keep small businesses open, or was it to keep people employed? And those are two very different goals.
Both.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in a perfect world, yeah.
Yeah.
But so the goal was to keep small businesses employed, I think was the goal. And but the issue entailed that a lot of these larger businesses, they don't have the biggest margins in the world either. We love to believe, but I'll give you an example. The EBITDA for Motel 6, I believe, was like $200 million of how much profit they made. But Southwest Airlines or American Airlines, I believe, is in the 70 millions. Mm-hmm. So these two companies, Southwest and American, are much larger companies, have much larger incomes and make tons more money. But in terms of profit, they made half as much as, say, Motel 6, which didn't make nearly the amount of money, maybe $3 billion a year. Mm-hmm. And so when you're dealing with that, and a lot of these larger companies are making a ton of money.
My first question is always, where did my baggage fees go?
Right. So
you're charging me an arm and a leg, American.
Yeah. And how are you not making that much profit? But yeah, when you deal with that and you see that this economic downfall, not a ton of them just had this buckets of money laying around where they could keep things going. And so there's layoffs across the board, and we would love to think one crooked CEO took all the money and ran, but that's just not what happened. It went away. And so the real question is like I said, are we trying to keep people employed, or are we trying to save small businesses? And we had to make that decision as a country, And it's not easy.
Distributed in a correct manner.
Yeah. It's not easy. None of this is easy, and you want a perfect world,
always.
Yeah, but you do the best you can, and so the CARES Act, I think, is going to be enforced. What I worry is it may be too late. They're trying to not make it too late, but this is hard to do, and there's a lot of businesses that have closed, and I don't know that they'll ever be able to come back because this has been such a long lockdown. These restaurants, these salons, these entertainment avenues, are they going to be able to come back? And it's a real question. Like the movie theaters, were they already booming before?
Constantly, let's be honest.
Yeah,
and it was costing like $30 to go to the movies.
Right, but it's a lot of small business. A lot of small businesses are, a lot of families own a movie theater and they own a this and a that, and those are gone. A lot of kids out of high school would hand out tickets at the movie theaters. Those jobs are gone, and so there's a lot of shifting in this economy that was drastically and violently forced by the coronavirus.
And I think it's interesting you bring in, high school kids. It reminds me this new market that we're going to go into, this new economy that we're going to go into. It reminds me of when we were finishing up undergrad, and we went out into the market and there was nothing.
No.
Because we graduated, we finished in the middle of the recession.
Yes.
And it was horrible.
I opened my own business with what little money I had.
Yeah.
That was the only way I could get a job, was to create my own job.
And I think that it's going to be a rude awakening to these young kids who are getting out of high school, or these kids who are, graduating from college, and they were thinking that they were going to go into this illustrious booming economy. Yes. And then the Rona came and just slapped the recession out of this and said, honey, you don't know what's coming to you. Yeah. And
it's worse than the recession. I mean, when you and I graduated, we had an 8% unemployment rate. It is in the mid to high teens by the time that's done, and that's insane. That's double what you and I dealt with, and it is a lot of fun to be a kid in a growing economy. It is terrible to be the opposite. And you can't make enough money to pay your bills or have a phone or normal things. And that's if you get a job. And it's and the older populations, because of the economic problems, they don't retire. They can't retire. Their kids are living in their home.
Because the retirement retirement's already
Yes.
gone. Their
Yes.
retirement was spent trying to pay
Right.
for rent or mortgage in the middle of the Rona.
Or their kids who all now live in their home because they can't make a living for themselves. And, so now the older people aren't retiring to take care of their kids, and the kids can't get a job because the old people won't retire.
They're not getting experience,
right.
and you need an experience
You
to get
need
the
5
job,
years experience if you want to get an entry-level job. So yeah, it's a conundrum. And so the way it corrects itself is that idea of deregulation and economic growth. It's the only fix. It's always been the only fix. Well, that's not true.
It can't be all deregulation. We have to have some antitrust regulation, right?
Before, when we had trouble, we could invade Mexico or just push further west, and then we'd be like, y'all move out there, and it's free. But yeah, once James K.
take
Polk
over other people's lands and then push Trail of Tears, because
it fixed a lot of problems. In any type of political problems, you would just take some more land.
They would just take it away from other people. Yeah. That's so horrible.
But once
it is our history.
It's true. But since James K. Polk and that that time period when we reached the Pacific and there was no further west we could go, we've had to kind of just figure this out, and we can't. It's been a fight since then, and it's been centuries. We've only had one civil war, thank goodness. But
never have another.
Yeah, I will say that's the one thing I'm not worried about. I know that's not going to happen. The bigger issues I worry about is the ability to reach people who have differing opinions than me. That's my fear. It's
there's a divide in
the media, and
there's such a divide, but there's also there's a lack of patience. There's impatience when it comes to differing opinions. It's like if somebody were to stand in front of me and say the sky is purple, and I would say no, it's blue. And immediately people just go crazy and say, how dare you say the
You're
sky
racist.
is blue?
Yeah.
The sky isn't blue, it's purple. And
yes, you don't understand the difference of cultural, and there's, I think a lot of that, though, I will say this, the few things I haven't heard recently are things like cultural appropriation or things like that have kind of died down. I think we remembered that being American is important. And I will say coronavirus did a lot to get rid of the tribalism that was really growing in our universities. So we are still fighting about the economy. We're still fighting about policy. But a lot of the tribalism, the white nationalist and the other side, a lot of it's left. We're not talking about it, and it's good.
Well,
we'll see.
I think I will say that it has been resurrected with the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery.
Yes,
I'll be very clear in my opinion that I don't think it was murder.
Yeah, but it's clear. It's such a ridiculous minority who disagrees with you. It's both parties agree with you. Politically, everyone agrees with you.
The thing that I find, it kind of gives me goosebumps is that we still have pockets in our society, and maybe it's not me being naive, but it just always still gives me goosebumps that there are people who are willing to cover up things like this, and because the folks who were involved had friends in high places, they were able to just kind of brush it along, and this is a clear case where this is murder and they should have been arrested immediately. And there were 5 witnesses. There wasn't just one. There were 5 witnesses.
Right.
And they just.
Well, that's the beauty of not giving the government power. I always come back to that, right?
He's a libertarian, y'all. You can't blame the man.
The problem here was not Republicans or Democrats or conservatives or liberal. The problem here was the government not enforcing the law. That was very ridiculously backed because of who they knew in the government. And that's what happens when the government is charged with doing everything and there is no oversight. There is no popular way for us to peacefully overthrow our government. And you know what's going to happen is those people are not going to be in government. And that's not a good enough punishment, I think. I get it. But at least we now know who they are, the way they operated, and it's very public and it's very known. And so,
It should be an example to,
to other DAs and other
and
mayors and other,
injustices and
yeah,
to misbehavior. It's not something that we'll ever accept.
yes,
And to be very clear, this is a big topic, not just because it's murder, but because we live in the United States of America, and when it comes to race and race relations, it is a big deal in America because it's not only part of our history, but it's part of our present. And to
yeah,
see this kind of behavior, like you said, this has become almost a unifying factor, which is horrible.
yes,
Took the life of a young man in the middle
yeah,
of a global pandemic to kind of bring all sides together and say this is unacceptable.
no,
We can't allow this to
that's
continue
right.
to happen, and these young men of color to be affected in this negative manner.
Even if it were reversed, though, even that's the thing. We accept only equal application of the law. And I do believe that it wasn't because of the race. I do. I think it was because of who they knew is the reason it wasn't enforced. So
I
if
do
it,
agree on that
if they
factor.
didn't know the DA and they didn't know all those other people's,
But
I don't
I
believe
do
it would have been
believe that
shut under the rug.
their behavior would have been different if they had seen a
Now
different.
that I can agree. That I can agree with.
And
I
that's
totally agree with that. I guess I'm more thinking of the enforcement of it and the fact how that gap of when they were finally charged and all of that. The actual act itself, I do believe, was racially motivated, but the not charging, the follow up and the
it was
application of
buddies.
the
It was
law
a
is
small
not
town
racial.
with buddies
Yeah,
covering up for their buddies,
exactly,
and
exactly.
and
And
they're just like,
that's a problem. That's a problem
that's
because
but that's the
people are
reality that we
discussing.
face.
Yeah,
Affluenza teen, the stanford
yeah,
rapist, like we
yeah.
continuously see, and we need to. I'll be sincere. I think we need to have, if not federal, at least state level laws that there is harsh punishment anytime, the buddies let their friends go. Even if it's, what's his name? The one in Chicago,
Oh,
the
starts with
actor.
K.
Oh gosh, my brain just went blank.
I don't know.
But
Smollett?
he basically
Oh,
got away on lying, and the district attorney decided I'm not going to press charges, and it just went away.
yeah.
We need. I will say this: we need to have a complete justice reform.
It's
In regard in
hard though. It's
America.
hard because you gotta
I
have
know it's
evidence,
hard,
you
but
know, and
anything worth having is hard.
you gotta have. Well, I guess I'm saying that the answer's not easy. I'll say it in a different way, which is the opposite. But like the DA has to have a case in order to press charges. And there's a lot of times the DA presses charges when he in no way has a case. And I don't want that to happen either. I don't want innocent people
Yeah.
going to jail. And so, on the other hand, I don't want DAs pressing charges because they're afraid that they're going to go to jail because we may think they know someone who knew someone.
Yeah.
So
There has to
there's
be.
always an
Has to
imbalance one way or the other. And so, just that knee-jerk reaction to yank it the other way, just know that there's going to be very ill effects to that as well. I do believe that in this case, there's enough evidence, and again, it would have to go to a jury, but I think in this case, we should be able to take something like this to a jury and say, here's your evidence. Is he guilty? And if so, he should go to prison.
And I'm glad that the state of Georgia took over. That's one thing
Yeah.
I'm very happy that
But
happened.
there's prosecutorial immunity that kind of keeps us from being able to do that. And
Right.
in some ways, I agree with it because I get with the basics of it that a prosecutor should be able to do their job without fear of repercussion. But in some ways, I'm like, nah, if you do something like this, rather than just getting voted out of office and disbarred, I think
You need
you
to be
should go to jail.
punished. You need to, yeah, exactly. Go
And
to
so
jail.
how do we do that? How do we do that? So
Justice
that's
reform.
something we'd have to talk about. Yeah. But like I said, it's just
Let's
not
just
an
say
easy
justice
thing.
reform is such a broad,
Yeah.
way of trying to address such a convoluted, very detailed, in the minute details kind of problem. It starts at local level, state,
That's
federal,
right.
then you start going into districts and
Hmm.
all the
It's
census
crazy.
tracts and
Right.
counties and boroughs, and
That's right.
It's so much more complicated.
That's right.
I love politics.
I do too. I actually have a meeting in 6 minutes.
Yes.
I can't believe we had a good long talk.
We did have a good long talk. Yes. So let's close it out on this.
Let's see if anyone watches all of it.
Any one last thing you want to let the Pure Lunacy world know?
Keep listening. Watch every episode that my most beautiful friend airs. She's brilliant. And that's all I got.
We don't always agree, but what we do agree on is to always be kind and to be wonderful friends and never let our passion for politics die. So
Never.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you.
Yes. Bye.